welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. Hopefully you can hear us online. So today we've got 2 hours of quite a lot of information to get through today around the Shotover wastewater treatment plant disposal projects. For those who think you all met Simon Mason, Forest Manager, and Andy Hill, who's been managing this project for us. Andy's going to take us through the slides themselves. We'll be through. Online, we've also got representatives from Okaha and Te Amana, but I'm not sure Te Amana is there yet.
Te Amana knows, I'm not sure if Okaha is.
Okay, sorry. So we've invited them along, and we've got some presentation around the e-review, and so we're going to present that, but they're also in here. I think.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realise we'd started.
That's all right.
Well, we're only just here. I'll hand it back to you.
I see the acting chair got us going.
Okay.
So,
use the lateness.
that's right. So, anyway, so I was just saying that today we're just going to run through quite a lot of information today. Part of it is about a briefing of background to this, how we got to this present position and the work that's been done. You'll note that we're looking to come back to you in February with a substantive report, assuming everything goes well, about a long-term disposal option for Shotover. So today, hopefully we can get through the presentation, answer as many questions as we can as we go through that. And just so you know, John, we've got Okaha, representative from Okaha, and that's also join us online, observing and watching, answer questions.
Thank you for that introduction. Just to welcome everyone, and members of the public and media. Obviously, this is a public workshop. It is being recorded. If there are questions from any of our online counsellors we have, or other participants in the workshop, the governance team will let us know. Just from getting through the business today, I'm going to ask if we're able to finish 10 minutes early. And the reason for that is there's been a double booking on the room, and there's the Regional Deal Negotiating Committee team, not the committee, but the staff have got this room from 11:30. So there's, if we're able to work through the presentation, I'm sure most of the councillors will have pre-read the material, and there will be a lot of questions. So I'll just ask staff to make sure that we are able to leave a good amount of time for questions.
So, John, they've got a new room now, so actually...
They've got a new room?
They've got a new room, so
are we sure?
With the original plan. So
right, we'll stick to that is good. So, but yes, obviously there's a lot of information that's been provided and read, and all the history that's been traversed in the past. So I think making it a really good space for the questions is the most important thing that we can do today.
Yep. So it's good to have an extra 10 minutes. Yeah. So I think if you're happy with that, I'll hand over to Simon to run through, and Andy. And the plan will be to get through the slides as quickly as we can. We've got particular hold points after each section to have questions, if we can hold the questions to them. We know there's a lot to get through today.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. And I'll very quickly hand over to Andy. Just wanted to also call out that online we have 2 representatives of GHD, so that's some of our experts that have been informing this process. So Helen Barkley and Anthony Kirk.
Who's GHD?
GHD, sorry. But where are they based? Or Arts and Engineering Consultancy.
So they'll be doing a lot of advice around the disposal options.
You, Andy.
Kia ora, thank you very much, everyone. Councillors, Mayor, good morning. Andrew Hill's my name, Senior Project Manager with QLDC. I'm going to be taking you through this. As noted, there's a fair bit to get through, so I'm not going to delay too much. I just want to start by saying that there's 2 reasons I'm here, probably, and I think I'm the best person to be talking you through this. First, obviously, is my time in council. I've pretty much been on this the whole time. I think we had a kick-off meeting in my first week here last year. So have a really good understanding, particularly of the long-term disposal solution. The second one is I'm a project manager. I'm not a technical expert on wastewater treatment. And so at times I need to wind down that technical speak from our consultants. And so therefore I feel that I'm going to certainly acknowledge that there's not necessarily technical people in the room here. So I'm going to try and make this as simple to understand as we can. As as was referred to before, we're gonna break the presentation into a number of stages. I'd ask that you just let me present through that stage, and then we're going to pause for questions at the end of each stage, okay? And then if we can wrap up with any time at the end, we can have any sort of generic questions at the end. So first thing we're going to be doing is looking at the history around the upgrades and a little bit about the process. It's a bit of a wastewater treatment plant 101 for everybody, just to get a bit of an understanding. And I understand there's also a site visit planned for down at the Shotover wastewater treatment plant later in the month.
It's the 18th of December.
Couple of items here I just want to bring everyone's attention to. So on the right-hand side, we've got the, I guess an aerial view of the ponds. We can hopefully, okay. Right. So up the top there on the right hand side, the red and the yellow are the two sort of, I guess, reactors that are with the second one just built. The area's got three main ponds, and they're referred to pond 1, 2 and 3 as they move from sort of Coronet Peak down to the Kawerau River. Down the bottom end of pond 3 is where we have a UV treatment plant, and so that's a final bit of disinfection prior to the wastewater, moving to the disposal method. Also down on the lower delta, you've got the old disposal field, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. Shown in the yellow line is the approximate channel where the current discharge is going to the Shotover River. And the green dotted line down on the lower shot over there is what's called a river training line. You might think of it as kind of a flood bank type thing that's designed to divert the Shotover River on an angle that doesn't back up the Kawerau into the lake. So a little bit of a scene setting, but as I say, we'll get a better idea of that in a few weeks' time. I guess a couple of points that I just want to make here. Prior to 2017, when the first of those reactor process trains came online, those oxidation ponds, so ponds 1, 2 and 3 was essentially what was used to treat the wastewater, and from there it was discharged directly to the Shotover River. In the early stages there, QLDC gained a series of consents, and those consents are tied around new infrastructure coming online, which progressively gives an improved set of conditions that QLDC needs to apply to, and I'll talk shortly about what they're based around. But basically, as a new piece of infrastructure comes online, the old consent gets discarded, and the new consent kicks in essentially. In terms of the upgrades there, in recent years. There was a considerable amount of investment from QLDC over the years, starting back in 2017 or before then, with the stage 1. That's the modified Lutzak-Ettinger activated sludge process. So excuse me if I just refer to that as an MLE from now on. And the older one, the one that's been there since 2017, we'll refer to as MLE1. So as I say, constructed 2017, and the idea at that point was that it would process about 80% of the town's wastewater through that MLE process. The remaining 20% went through the oxidation ponds that we showed, and then they'd get blended at the end prior to the UV treatment, and then disposed of. Stage 2 of that was the dose and drain disposal field. That's the disposal field that's failed and that was essentially diverted from earlier this year. That came online approximately 2017, with the idea being that 2019, with the idea being that at that point the treated wastewater was disposed through that disposal field to effectively what was considered a land discharge there. Stage 3 is recently finished, or is the main parts of it have just finished, and that's the second MLE, so the in parallel one that you see down there now. The idea being that now that that's done, 100% of the wastewater for the region will be going through either of those MLEs. It's designed out to a 2048 population forecast, and as you can see there, in green sort of is the cost, or the construction cost investment there. Incorporated with that is also some pond 1, as we saw there before, has been decommissioned, and some work's been done on that, and I'll talk to that very shortly too. There's also, as well as the disposal project, there's also money set aside for future upgrades as well. One of those is a treated wastewater storage pond, or often referred to as a calamity pond, and also some upgrades to the inlet works there. And I'll talk a little bit about that emergency storage pond later as well. Really to give everyone, again, a 101 about the process. So the raw wastewater comes in on the left-hand side. There is an inlet screen, which is off the picture here, which essentially gets rid of the big stuff out of the process. It then puts it into the reactor, and then you have two separate tanks there. One of those essentially starves all the matter in there of oxygen, and that forces various breakdown and chemical reactions to occur, and then it moves into a stage where essentially an oversupply of oxygen, which then further influences that biological process. What essentially happens is think of it as a sort of a living organism that's got stuff moving around all of it, and then at one point you're depriving it of oxygen, so it gets really hungry, and the next minute you're oversupplying it, and it just goes kind of crazy in terms of eating. So it's a living organism in that way, and the whole idea of it, that when it gets to that clarifier tank, is that that biomass, the living organism, is essentially soaked up the majority of all the solids and that type of thing in there, and then that sinks to the bottom and allows in that clarifier all the remaining treated wastewater to be taken off the top. That then goes through a UV treatment, which is sort of a final element of disinfection, prior to it then being discharged to whichever the appropriate sort of discharge is there. So yeah. Couple of photos there. On the left-hand side is that MLE2 being, I think this was taken as part of the commissioning there. So you can actually see in those chambers, the first ones, there's not a lot of air, not a lot of bubbles in that, and then those subsequent chambers, that's where the oxygen is introduced in that. And the large circular areas at the end, they are the clarifier tanks where that final stage of the process works. On the right-hand side there, we've got a quick schematic. That's the old pond one, so it's just to the Kawato River side of the two MLEs. The left-hand side of that is being established, and this work's still ongoing, established as a raw wastewater emergency storage or calamity pond. So essentially, if you've got a fault at the plant and the plant can't process the raw wastewater coming in, that allows a diversion to be held in there for a certain period of time, and then it'll get pumped back through the plant once it comes up online. The right-hand side is being set up as a stormwater catchment. There's a lot of stormwater that comes off sort of Frankton Road and Glenda Drive and that into the site, as I understand it. So that's been set up to capture that and allow that to drain away. A lot of numbers in here, and I'm not wanting to go into detail around them, but I guess what this is trying to show is the improvements in the discharge requirements as we've introduced new infrastructure over the years. So prior to 2017, as I say, it was oxidation ponds and going to the shot over. From 2017 to 2025, that increased or essentially decreased standards there in terms of volumes and elements of nutrients and that sort of thing in there. And then another step change from 2025 to 2030, which is when the second MLE comes online again. The 2031, we were looking at that in terms of what the potential new improvements that we think we could possibly get going forward as well. And we obviously still need to do a bit of work on that with the final options. I guess the key thing here I'm wanting to show is that the improvements in the discharge quality really comes from investment in the treatment process itself, rather than the disposal process. The disposal is really about returning the wastewater, the treated wastewater or the remaining water to the environment where it essentially originated from. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about the old disposal field. When I say the old disposal field, the failed disposal field, we'll talk through a bit about emergency enforcement order and emergency discharge. So the old disposal field is referred to as a dose and drain disposal field. the picture on the left-hand side, what it's made up of is a series of buried plastic chambers essentially, and there's about 11 of them down the delta there, with the idea that the treated wastewater is dosed into each of those chambers and then allowed to drain away through the riverbed into the groundwater and eventually finding its pathway out to what we believe the Kawerau River at this stage. The idea behind it was that it would be fully buried. The picture on the right-hand side shows it, I believe, shortly after construction, where all you can see above it is a couple of those standpipes and sort of manhole covers and that type of thing. But yeah, what it's actually made up of is these plastic chambers buried under the ground that allow the wastewater to be the treated wastewater to be dosed into them. The idea of it being that you dose them and then you allow time for them to dissipate and essentially rest. The challenges that were really come about and the reasons why we believe it failed. One is in the area, there's not a lot between the actual disposal field and the groundwater. So there's quite a high groundwater table there. So there's not a lot of capacity for the actual treated wastewater to soak away into the ground. If you look at this diagram here, I think it shows really well the yellow and the sort of turquoise colours. They display a previous before the training line went in, where some of the streams from the Shotover River used to run. So there's an underground flow path in those areas of the yellow and the turquoise. And particularly the yellow one is where we believe the treated wastewater from that disposal field was getting picked up by and then taken through that underground flow path to the Kawerau River. Our investigations have found, particularly along the Kawerau and right up at the sort of the bottom corner of that photo, is we've got evidence of the nutrients coming out there that we believe has come from the disposal field itself. So there's really that hydraulic capacity in terms of how it was designed. The second thing is just around those buried plastic elements. There's very little access for them for maintenance. So what kind of happened is a lot of the fine, dusty sort of materials on the riverbed kind of got clogged up, and that with some of the suspended solids out of the treated wastewater, then just bound up and essentially just left a gluggy layer of stuff all within those that just prevented stuff, the treated wastewater from draining away through the disposal field.
Quick question. When the plastic cells were put in, what was their projected life?
Not sure on that one off the top of my head.
They were a long-term solution for the
Yeah, the plastic itself or the...
No, just the solutions. What was its projected life?
It was intended as a long-term solution, so it would have been a 50 or 80 year solution.
And 2017?
2019.
2019, yeah.
We're going to hold questions.
Yeah, we can hold questions. There will be a break.
Yes, sorry. And really the final one there, the suboptimal location and orientation. When I refer to that underground flow path, it picks up the treated waste at the top of it. And so by the time you get to the bottom of the disposal field, that area underneath the disposal field is already saturated from the treated wastewater coming in above. So its real-time capacity was just not suboptimal. In an ideal world, you'd make it wider and you'd actually put it across both of those two ground flow paths. If you
want to speed you up, we're going to run out of time.
Yeah.
Run through. So maybe let's
the past more the future.
Yeah, let's take them with red.
Yeah.
Quickly skim, and we'll come back to any questions if that's okay. We've got, obviously, we will not make it through.
Disposal field challenges, as I say, we've talked through a few of those. We don't think that the actual old disposal field is able to be reused. Its capacity is so limited that we don't think it's viable as a long-term solution. Because of the failure of the disposal field, ORC undertook enforcement order action. The keynotes up there are the bullet points in the lower half around the obligations that QLDC needs to provide from there. As part of that, and even before that, we are undertaking our own sampling groundwater and surface water on the delta. and that information is available on the QLDC website. A snapshot of that is up there. This is really good. I think it shows where the line essentially drops flat and runs along. That was the implementation of the MLE2. So the stuff earlier to that is the influence of the oxidation ponds, where the treatment is not as good. Emergency works, no surprises. So emergency works, the chief executive signed off on that the 27th of March. Due to the failure of that and an increasing aviation or bird strike risk, the emergency works commenced 31st of March, and we're now undergoing a resource consent process for that. It's been publicly notified and likely an Environment Court hearing in the new year. There are 2 resource consents being sought there. One is for the actual discharge. The second is for a diverter minor channel. I just want to be clear on that. It is simply what's shown in the left-hand image there, an excavator scraping back to divert a small portion, about 2 to 2.5 metres squared, and that aids with the mixing past the discharge area. So the far right-hand side of that orange line is where the treated wastewater discharges into the shot over, and the key thing there is to try and enhance that mixing at that point of discharge. Right, questions on basically anything we've covered thus far?
No, we're short of time. But back in the recommending report, when this field was actually dealt with by the ORC before it got its consent, in that report it says the disposal field is designed to provide for expansion which will occur in response to how well the field is coping with flows and to address projected increases in discharges over time. It is the applicant's stated intention to monitor groundwater mounting and treat this initial disposal field as a full working trial in order to set design parameters for future expansion. What happened to that?
So I guess my understanding of the planned expansion was to expand further to the south, which would just continue to exacerbate the issue. So from the work that we have done subsequently, there appears to be flaws in the original thinking around that disposal field and how it would have been expanded.
And have we done any soakage tests on the field? So now it's drained. Have we thought about potentially remediating one of the cells, blocking it off, doing a soakage test?
Yeah, so we haven't undertaken any soakage testing since the field's been commissioned, but we have worked with our experts to understand what the capacity of that area would look like, and that has been one of, from a fundamental principles basis, that was one of the long listed options that was considered and hasn't been deemed as an appropriate or sustainable long-term solution.
Without any perhaps that it was just on a desktop analysis?
There's a lot of available information to make those decisions.
So just to comment on that, even if that was a viable option, it's still a discharge into the delta, which still is a direct discharge into water effectively. So all the options...
I don't think that was the question. I think the question was, has soakage been...
So time's answered.
That's been
answered. Just because the ORC's report has come back on our application, and we do have to maintain 2.5 QMEX, I think, to discharge into, with the remaining flow being 1 QMEX. Looking at the shot over, I don't know that this particular solution is going to be viable. We may need to use it in the future for a partial discharge.
So this is regard to the short-term consent?
Yeah, that's what we're asking questions on. I know we need to get on to the long-term.
John.
Thank you. The capacity of the plant with the new MLE and into the future, are the population projections and therefore demand based on what was estimated at the time that was put in place, or does it take into account that almost always those projections tend to be substantially underestimated, and we have a stack of fast-track applications sitting there, some being processed?
So, I guess the 2 MLEs were designed to a 2048 population forecast at the time. I think around 19,500 cubic metres a day. Based on what is happening in terms of the population growth, the estimate is that element is going to be met earlier in the 2040s. What it means is that there will need to be an increase in treatment capacity at some point, and so it's going to need to be factored into the overall plans. Particularly the project I'm working on is looking at the disposal of whatever comes out that treatment plant. So we've worked on a 20, we'll cover it a little bit later, we've worked on gaining a 35-year consent out to 2060, and we've got recent, as of April of this year, population forecast updates out of QLDC that we're basing that on. That is agnostic of where the population growth is, but it's based on a total 2060 volume within the current catchment, and it also includes the southern corridor in that.
It's currently, it all ends up at the same place.
That's the assumption we're working off, and that basically we need to dispose of what comes through.
Cool, thank you. And one follow-up if I can. So their population projections you're using, are they the median or are they the extreme?
We've been using the higher end. I think they had 3 different numbers. We're using the top end.
So something we're doing a bit of work now around re-verifying that, looking at our own network capacity and constraints.
Yep.
Also looking at our overall strategy around how we dispose of things. So that's, as
bigger picture.
Andy said, this is about the disposal field, but it does have significant implications on our future capacity at that site in terms of the volume. So it's a separate bit of work to this. We're still going to dispose of the treated effluent.
Cool, that's another set of questions, isn't it? Thank you. Thanks, Dave.
I've got a few questions. I'll try and keep it brief in no particular order, just so we can understand the context of that discussion. Is the site itself capable of adding additional treatment capacity, regardless of what happens of the disposal? Because that would be the question of whether it's physically possible to add treatment capacity there, or do we need it elsewhere? Just in terms of context around how the site is managed. So obviously we have contractors, so it might be helpful if somebody can speak to the chain of command, because it's no surprise there's been things in the media in the past about were the disposal fields cells clogged because of sediment or because of, how would I put this, maybe inadvertent things coming out of the treatment plant. So I'm interested to understand the management arrangements and how that links back to council, because I think that's really important. Calamity Pond, what sort of buffer storage we're talking about? A day, 3 days a week? So if you think about that, that would be good.
Okay, so first question around the capacity of that site for future treatment. Yes, it's a big site. Fortunately, we've decommissioned hectares worth of ponds, which then does free up additional space to invest in further treatment. The high rate treatment that we have now is a far smaller footprint than the oxidation ponds, so there is a lot of capacity there for the future needs of the Whakaturu Basin. There's also opportunities to alter the technology into the future, which enables even more concentration of the treatment, and potentially avoid building more concrete tanks. So there's an embedded carbon benefit of exploring alternative technologies into the future. In regard to the chain of command for the operations contracts, so within my team, so I'm the infrastructure operations manager across all the activities, transportation, through waters and solid waste. We have a contract. We have multiple contracts for all the services that are provided up the Three Waters. Veolia Water holds the most significant, so that is the district-wide Three Waters contract, and as part of that, in 2023, they took over the operation of the Shotover wastewater treatment plant. We have a contract and operations manager who's responsible for that contract, amongst other waters contracts, and we've also recently been expanding that team available, the internal resourcing around that team, so to ensure that we can do more auditing and have more involvement with the management of those contractors. In the past, it has been quite a resource-constrained area of the business from a QLDC perspective. The district's growing, obviously we're having to respond to those resourcing needs.
Is that contract manager internal or external?
Internal.
We have an internal contract manager, so we don't have an external.
So we have an external engineering contract, and the engineering contract delegates a number of his responsibilities to the engineer's rep, which is the contract manager in this case. And then for your last question, so there's 2 ponds that we're talking about. So the raw water calamity pond, Andrew introduced, So that is based on around 24 hours of average day storage. So that is really for an emergency situation where the entire treatment plant cannot take, or a substantial component of the treatment plant cannot receive flows to allow work to happen. That is not a long-term solution, and there's not a suitable protection against a biological failure. I guess, as Andy introduced, these are treatment plants are kind of living organisms, and so if the biology becomes unstable, it typically takes many days to weeks to restore that process. That is obviously the fundamental priority when managing a treatment plant, to keep on top of the biological process.
How many days of volume does that pond allow?
Sorry, the raw water calamity pond?
Yeah.
That's one average day.
One average day, right?
That 20 million upgrade for the emergency storage pond, what specifically or roughly is that for?
So that's the treated wastewater calamity, or treated emergency diversion pond. And so we're basically just kicking off that project. It was later in this decade and has been brought forward as part of the enforcement audit. There was some initial work done around it with Becca. It's turning that pond 3B, which is the one closest to the UV treatment plant, for emergency storage. And that's around 40,000 cubic metres, which is around 3.5 days supply or storage at today's rate, and about 1.5 to 2 days at our 2060 volumes. We are just retesting those numbers that does stack up with what we think our future demands and requirements are.
And it's for treated wastewater, would otherwise go into the discharge. What would be the circumstances that would need emergency storage for it?
So that's in the situation where our analysers tell us that the material is off spec. And so you want to divert it from discharge to send it back around for reprocessing.
But not meeting.
Okay, so it's not meeting the discharge.
No, it's to provide some more operational buffer. Right. There's an issue, it gives you something to do that isn't to discharge it.
And one question about the MLEs, the two of them, are they operating completely independent, or do they rely on shared infrastructure at the start?
So there is some shared infrastructure, so they rely on the same screening process at the front end, and then it's split between the two tanks. They rely on the same sludge dewatering process, but we do have duty standby centrifuges, so that's the process for extracting the biomass to make sure it's kept at the right kind of age for the optimisation of the treatment process, and then dewatering that sludge as waste to take down to the AB line landfill. So that's a common unit as well. They run off separate transformers now, but they rely on the same standby generator. Just conscious we're probably 3 minutes over. We have a lot of questions time here, so is it an opportunity to move on or take final questions? Continue.
Great, thanks all. So looking at the next stage is around our long list options for the alternate disposal work. So really, as it notes there, really this project is looking at that long-term disposal solution for the Shotover wastewater treatment plant. As part of that disposal solution, we're also considering if additional treatment or filtration is required as part of that to meet varying consent standards. LTP has funding allocated of 77.5 million, as it notes there, and what we're seeking out of this is a 35-year consent, which is the industry standard and the new legislation around that. This next slide really just shows you that, I guess, we've started as wide as we can in terms of our analysis of options. The gap analysis and determining a basis of design. We went through a wide options assessment in the early stages late last year, and that narrowed it down to 13 options on our long list. Essentially, there was 8 with some sub-options of each. That occurred up until April when we had our workshop and then presented to the council then. And then since that time, we've been working through our shortlist options analysis of those 5 options, delving into them in much more detail to really understand the nuts and bolts of what they may or may not look like and if they're achievable. From October of this year, we've had our analysis workshop within the project team, which has scored all of those shortlist options, and then we're now working through a process now to identify a preferred option with the target being to have confirmed that by March. We then need to go into that resource consent timeline, and we've got a reasonable amount of time to undertake that resource consent. We're planning on that we may need to go through a fair bit of a process with that, which we can talk about a little bit later. From there though, and a lot of these activities are sort of happening in parallel. We go through the detailed design of that consented option, and then construction, with it being in place by December 30, is the process that we're trying to follow overall. We asked a little bit further about population forecasts and that we're looking at. So these are the updated forecasts, the key numbers that we're now working on out to that future 2060 number, and compared to a recent population projections. So basically, essentially, we're looking at a doubling, or slightly more than a doubling of everything over the course of the next 35 years in terms of the numbers. Just as an idea to put that all into context, so our current average dry weather flow, it says 12,000 metre cubed a day. That's the equivalent of around 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools per day of actual treated wastewater that we're discharging. That will go up to 10.5 Olympic-sized swimming pools at our 2060 average daily average dry weather flow.
And maybe just to bring it back to a point you raised earlier, so the current treatment capacity side is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah. So there will need to be an increase in that treatment capacity sometime between now and 2060 to plan for those. We've culled out a lot in terms of the long list option assessment. This is really a snapshot of the key elements that were undertaken on that. Included in some of the pre-workshop reading was the long list report, which does go into that in a whole lot more detail, and I'm more than happy to have some discussions if anyone does want to go back over that. But essentially, the long list identified 8 options, of which there were some sub-options of each. We really looked at, in terms of that process, is looking at the potential disposal methodologies that we thought were available. So that might be, we looked at bore injections into the ground, we looked at spray, we looked at a sort of a low rate discharge, sort of imagine a drip hose in your garden type thing. We looked at a medium rate, which dissipates at a decent pipe in the ground that allows the treated wastewater to soak away, and we looked at high rate, where you sort of inundate areas and let it soak through the gravels. We then sort of overlaid that with available land around the area that we felt was viable, and that then gave us essentially those 13 options that you see on the screen. This analysis up here was very high level in terms of, and as you can see, it sort of talks about the complexity of the build and the operation, and a rough idea of the construction costs, with each of those pile of coins up there indicating approximately $40 million. It was pretty high level at that point in time. The highlighted yellow ones there were the 5 options that were carried forward from the long list to the short list. And to put it sort of pictorially, those 5 short list options that were carried forward, so all of the options involved some form of additional filtration, which is sort of the box there in the middle. 2 of the options had a discharge on the Kawerau River. One of them was essentially a direct discharge once it had gone through that filtration. The second option went through a subsurface wetlands, which is depicted by that green area, and we'll go into these in a bit more detail later. In terms of the 3 options up on Frankton Flats, there were 2 options, or one option, the moderate rate land disposal, was really if you can think of it as a horizontal disposal, so stuff is buried in the ground over a large area and is allowed to dissipate through the gravels. The deep bore and the soak holes are more a vertical approach, where with the deep bores going down up to 100 metres into the ground and injecting the treated wastewater directly into the aquifer there. The soak holes are more elevated above that, allowing a discharge in the treated wastewater to then percolate through the gravels down into the treated wastewater. But they were the 5 shortlist options that we came up with.
Would you mind explaining just what does a subsurface wetland look like on the surface?
plants, gravel and plants, essentially.
Given that the airport doesn't want habitat, why do we include that in the shortlist?
I can go through that a little bit later if you like. Are there any questions on the long-term disposal, the longest options?
A couple of questions, if I'm going to jump in. Just going back to the flows. So we're looking at the peak wet day flow being doubling the peak dry flow. So is that because we're treating stormwater, or because people use more water when it's raining, or is it because we've got 100% infiltration and inundation?
So that is an allowance for normal practice, I&I, so infiltration and inflow. So with that is still relatively low.
So the reality is we've got twice the amount of volume to manage.
So that's not the current performance. So we are fortunate that the network's relatively young, but it will age. And so typically it will get worse. We will obviously do everything we can to continue to renew and invest in managing I&I, but the responsible thing to do is to make a reasonable allowance based on industry norms.
Okay, and just following on from that, because as the plant operators would tell you, that having a consistent quality of influent is pretty key to safe operating of the plant. So if we're having very variable influent when it rains, that has its challenges. What's our response to that?
So the plants are designed to manage the peak flows that come through with wet weather. So whilst wet weather generates higher hydraulic flows through the plant, that's at a lower load because it's more dilute. So that takes some of the pressure off. The more significant challenge for a district like ours is the peak populations that come in as a step change, such as for Christmas and New Year and certain holiday periods in the ski season. They are more challenging because they are genuine additional load on the treatment plant, which requires more careful management.
So with respect, my question was about the concentration and the dilution of what comes into the plant and how that impacts our ability to keep that biological process running smoothly.
Yeah, the answer is just a normal part of operations, and the plant is designed with the capacity for those hydraulic flows.
One last question on flows. So what would be the low flow that you might see on a dry summer in the Shotover? So are we talking 2 QMEX, 3 QMEX, 8 to 10?
Yeah, 8 was the number. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that's what's.
So I might just pause for opportunity to Anthony to confirm that number, if that's okay, if he is able to.
It's low flow for the
Shotover.
I'll follow.
Yes, that's about right. The I2 measures, one's around 19 QMEX and the other one's around 10, so it just depends which one you use. I believe it to be about 10.
Thank you, Anthony.
And that's all above ground flow?
Yes, that's the measured flow.
I hope I'm not too far off the ranch here, but at no point in any of these options is there a consideration for possibly just literally taking the water and then putting it right back into the water system, into the potable water system, as some municipalities have done offshore?
So was that treating it and putting it back into?
Yeah, I mean, some places
potable?
are able to cleanse it to the level of 99.99, and the nines go out 10 digits after the decimal point.
I guess that was considered before the long list as a something we wanted to look at. We compared it to an Australian wastewater solution that did something similar, and the costs in that were, I think, between $1 and $1.5 billion. So we discarded it at that long before making the long list.
I just had a question. In the summary of the long list options, is there a reason we don't include like the environmental or the cultural significance? It's just kind of like technical complexity.
Yeah, look, all of those were considered as part of the analysis. I guess what I showed there was just a snapshot of some of those sort of key indicators there.
Yeah, so there was a full multi-criteria analysis behind
would be quite
that is available.
to see that.
That is in the attached material.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a
I
little bit digging.
think we covered it. Is it small?
Not for this, not for the long list. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question on that long list of criteria? And is there any measure of, I guess, risk or confidence on being able to deliver these?
Certainly in the shortlist assessment, we added that in terms of, our confidence in its ability to meet the consent requirements and the future flow forecasts.
And also construction might.
Yeah, construction and operational risks are also considered as part of the analysis.
And just one last one, for this whole program of work, have we assumed that QLDC is going to continue to run a centralised wastewater model? Is that what's being fed into the model?
So I guess what we've assumed is that we're going to fully utilise the Shotover asset. We've also made the assumption that the prudent thing to do is to allow for securing a 35-year consent and those flows being consolidated at this site. In parallel, there is a work stream looking at the opportunities that may be presented through decentralisation and looking at the populations may disperse throughout the basin. But I guess, fundamentally, as part of this assessment, we have considered where land is available, and the basin is very constrained regardless of where your treatment plants are.
I guess it's just the amount of area that you cater for, the more water you get, therefore the more land area you're going to need if you're going to discharge to land. So has that impacted on the viability or feasibility of the land disposal options, meaning that they don't necessarily make it to the shortlist?
Probably on the scale of Shotover, there's still a significant land requirement for true land discharge. You can see these numbers are quite large, 400 to 500 hectares for a low rate and 90 hectares for medium rate. But again, if you imagine where the treatment plants would go and the basin being quite constrained by the mountains that surround us, regardless of where those treatment plants end up, you still require the same volume of land within the basin. That makes sense.
It's different. I guess my point is it's different if the developers decide to do it on their own and carve out their own pieces of land. Anyway.
Move on. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. So looking at the those shortlist options in a little bit more detail. So what I want to do is take you through first some of the influences that have occurred over the 6 to 9 months as we've been developing the shortlist options. One of the key developments is legislation change. So August was the new Local Government Water Services Act, and that included a clause in that which we think has a very large bearing on what we should be putting forward as the final solution. I've highlighted it on the screen. I don't know if that came through on your presentations, but essentially the guideline from that legislative change is that the water service provider must, when making a decision, choose the option it considers to be the most effective option for providing wastewater services over the life of the infrastructure assets required to implement that option. So the cost effective is the kind of the key bit that we've taken out of that, and we've bounced ideas around the room as to exactly what cost effective does mean, and there's a little bit of interpretation open there, but that's one of the sort of key areas. The next one is when I developed the slide pack, proposed national wastewater standards. They came in, the actual updates, they were announced last week. I think they came out on the Friday the night, and we sort of got them early last week. We're currently reviewing them, but I guess I do have. So for those that aren't aware, so Te Amata Arawai have been developing new wastewater standards, commonly referred to as Wastewater Environmental Protection Standards, or WEPS, throughout this year. We reviewed an earlier draft of it back in March and have been awaiting the standards to be formally released over the last few months, and as I say, that was formally done last week. We've developed our shortlist options, our options assessment and the shortlist options report that you've had. Based on our understanding of the current RMA process and the draft standards from earlier. So we haven't had the opportunity yet to overlay what the actual confirmed standards are. They were formally released last week. We're reviewing them to fully understand what, if any, impact they have on our options, and we anticipate we'll be in a position to sort of brief back to this forum early in the new year on any impacts to that. But at this stage, we understand the following. That the Shotover disposal project will likely be a carve-out essentially from the standards, meaning we expect that the new disposal limits won't apply directly to this situation. That's due to us anticipating that the Kawerau River, where our shortlist will talk about shortly, would be considered to meet the attributes of Band A under that new, the new information. Regardless, those WEPs or the protection standards will still hold a relevance to how we discharge from the Shotover wastewater treatment plant and how we will approach that under the conventional RMA process. We believe that the carbo will likely be considered a high dilution environment, but we do need to undertake some further work to confirm this. There's also an element in the new WEPs around a hard-bottomed river, and we believe that the carbo will be considered under that, which then requires us to undertake a periphyton risk assessment. Now, periphyton is kind of the algae growth that you get on rocks and rivers, and that risk assessment process will help determine the risk of that periphyton and therefore the level of nutrient treatment and discharge limits that we would need to allow for. So there's a little bit of work to do with those WEPs coming in now that we fully or are gaining a fuller understanding of what they might mean to just validate that against our shortlist options. The WEPs do come into effect on the 19th of December this year. And when granting a new or renewal consents, consenting authorities may allow up to 5 years for upgrades to occur. We would anticipate that our existing operational date of the new disposal solution of the 31st of December 2030 will still be able to be met at this stage. So appreciate that was kind of read word for word, but that's got, yeah, it's fairly new information that we're, as I say, we're still working to fully understand the impacts on there.
So just filtering through the jargon on that for a minute term. Are those new standards higher or lower than the existing discharge from the?
So I'll try and answer this clearly when it's not clear.
I know, I get that.
So I guess the draft standards were quite permissive, but we expect it to be a carve out anyway based on the pristine environment. So the carve out's based around the receiving water meeting the Band A requirements under the MPSFM, Statement of Fresh Water. And then the periphyton risk is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. So if we look, well, how do I explain this? So the standards, whilst we're a carve out, that's basically going to set the minimum requirement. So the regional council couldn't set a more permissive effluent discharge than what is stipulated in the standards. So this is our minimum bar. When you look at the periphyton risk, and we haven't done this work yet, so we don't know. So at a high dilution receiving environment, you could be very low risk up to very high risk. Up to high risk, it is aligned. So we're sitting at the high risk is what our current discharge standard is. Discharge treatment standard is. Our discharge consent under the previous regime was quite a lot more permissive. The one that's effectively enacted now through the commissioning of the second reactor is quite well aligned to that high risk category. So that's
to reading between the lines on that, is saying that the higher the nutrient loads you discharge, the more algae you create.
No. So the periphyton risk assessment is based on the nature of the receiving environment. So the nature of that river, how likely is a discharge to create periphyton growth?
Yeah, and that's got to do with the nature of the existing
the shading, the temperature of the river, all these things. So you have to have that assessment undertaken by a suitably qualified party, and you have to have a peer review conducted on that work to inform that periphyton risk. And then once we have that, we understand what our minimum is.
And these new standards only apply to new consent, so they don't override an existing consent.
Correct.
But they could allow you to apply for a new consent under the new standards and get assessed under that over a period of 5 years or something, up to 5 years.
So the 5-year period is more for the regional councils can allow periods of time to enable the water supplier to undertake upgrades. So basically a 5-year grace period to get from where they are to where they need to be under the standards.
So just on
So even if the current discharge met the standards, you wouldn't automatically be able to rely on that to discharge to the river other than doing it through either the emergency consent or a new long-term consent.
Yeah, so any consents that are, I think it's public notification was the trigger. So how it applies to the short-term consent is we still need to figure out.
Because of the notification date?
Yeah, because of where that sits. 100% applies to what future consent we apply to.
So just a point of clarification. So we currently have no compliant discharge from the Shillover
Yes.
field. The short-term consent that we're applying for is for a 5-year period to give us that approval to carry on that emergency discharge. That gives us the window to then apply for the long-term. We're still trying to work through what the standards mean in terms of that. And there's a proposal in there that we have, if we have to upgrade the treatment machine with discharge into the water, 5 years to improve the treatment to meet that standard. So hopefully, I just thought we just need to be clear around that we've got 3 different things: current discharge, non-compliant, 5-year consent to give us time to work through this, and a long-term consent which may have some timeframes in there, and still trying to work through what the new standards mean for various options. Steve?
I just have a question on the legislation. This might actually be a question for Brendan, but what are the consequences of not following section 254?
Look, I don't think we could talk about that now. I need to take that on notice and go away happy to do that. But I don't think we can traverse that ground here.
Understood.
Just on that also, but I don't want legal advice or anything, but you said you've focused on the cost-effective part of that, but there is also over the life of the infrastructure assets.
100%. I guess my point is this. We believe this clause has relevance for this assessment. Yeah.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is I'd just be concerned if we're focusing on immediately cost-effective.
No, I will.
Because things, as we know, we have to factor in that things can change, including climate, including policies, and if we focus just on current parameters.
We certainly don't see that as a capital cost. It needs to be a holistic cost.
So,
thinking about what may change into the future, including policies.
so we see further on, we've got some assessment around the whole of life cost, because that's an important component, the capital cost and the operating cost, which has a direct impact on some of this. So
what was, just chip in, John, what was cost effective is always easy to work out with hindsight. The disposal technology for the DAD was a cost-effective option, and we clearly would question whether that was the case now. And in terms of that whole of life asset, what work has been done, because we know all rivers, especially in this district, with the material coming off the hills and coming down, their beds are all building up. That's taken as read, I guess. So what are the long-term implications for the suitability of that site set against an environment where the bed of the river is raising?
Sorry, the suitability of the treatment side or the disposal side?
Well, both.
I'm probably not feeling well informed to answer that question at the moment. I'll need to take advice and probably come back more explicitly. I guess we're not seeing particularly sediment accumulation affecting the treatment area or the discharge at the moment. It tends to mobilise and head further down the river than accumulate at the delta location. It's been our observation.
We're able to hold questions until the...
Yeah, I'd say it's probably a useful break around the WEPs in particular, because they're a little bit unique, and Andy is making good time at the moment. But,
thank you. So in the consideration of options then, are you looking at that some of the options seem to be very cheap and could be done quickly, others appear to be more expensive and would probably have a longer term advantage? Are you looking at the potential of mixed options?
yes.
Thank you. Cool. What is and you might not know this, I'm not sure, but what's the influence or the pertinence of the Kawerau River Protection Order in relation to the standards? Does it apply the current standards as the definition of protecting the quality of the river, or does it use standards that were in place at the time?
And the conservation order?
Yeah.
So I guess the conservation order is not that explicit.
No.
And the new standards that have actually come out are they are requiring very high standard of treatment, which is consistent with the order in my informed opinion. Yeah.
And last question on the discharge. So we're talking about the algae and having to do some more work to understand about that. So do we have is the technology available to treat our effluent to a standard that might allow that discharge in terms of nutrients? to into the river in the circumstances we're not causing these effects, because we're talking about disposal, but obviously no point in talking about the disposal if we can't deliver the treatment.
That's right. No, they are intrinsically linked, aren't they? So under the very high risk periphyton category, the total nitrogen limit from memory is 4. Our plant currently does, our consent limit is 10, and the plant is averaging between 6 and 8. So it would require an upgrade, and that becomes a very challenging upgrade. So 4 is kind of international best practice and would require significant investment.
So it could be, just following on from that, apologies for the laboured point, it could be that whilst we're looking at the cost of the disposal options, then if some more expensive disposal options might mean we don't need to have that investment in the plant, because it wouldn't be going into the river. So if we took the land disposal bores, whatever, then we wouldn't be caught by.
I think it would be wise to hold a response to that, because we're really going to talk to that.
I'll put that one out, because we're looking at disposal options, but maybe we need to.
And I guess when we consider these options, you have to think about the system holistically, because it needs to be appropriate for discharge to be able to obtain the consent, if nothing else, you know.
Okay, thank you.
So moving along, so continuing with the theme of key sort of developments as we've gone through that short list. So the first thing that sort of came into effect was the enforcement order, which did give us those dates that we needed to try and adhere to in terms of the lodgement of consent and have items operational. So that sort of put an overlay of even more urgency across everything than perhaps earlier. The next one was around the land accessibility. So 2 of the options were on the Shoalhaven Delta. The options up on Frankton Flats, we met with Queenstown Airport on a couple of occasions there to understand what their future use and future plans were there, and whether what we were looking at was going to be compatible with that. What that sort of led to in the feedback from QAC is they've got quite a big master plan that they're starting to progress through, which was utilising a number of the areas or the current greenfields area that we've potentially identified for at least one of those short-term options. QAC also raised sort of significant concerns around us undertaking or introducing the treated wastewater onto the Frankton Flats and some of the potential operational impacts that might have for them up there, which really said to me that if we're going to do something out there, we need to make sure it's properly investigated and we've got a really good idea of what those broader implications are going to be. But what that really meant, and I'll talk about it on I think the next slide, is that one of those options up on Frankton Flats that required a large area of land we didn't feel was going to be viable with that constraint on it. So in order to move forward, we focused on QLDC available or accessible land. At that point as well, we started looking at what we needed to do in terms of site investigations up on Frankton Flats to get a really good understanding of the full analysis up there to be able to make really informed decisions was going to be around that 12 to 18 months with a decent cost as it shows up there of site investigations. That included a number of monitoring wells so that we could really understand the groundwater flow underneath the ground there, the aquifer details on that, so that we could make sure that we weren't going to be doing anything adverse. We also believe that across the Frankton Flats somewhere there's a point where the groundwater flows to the Carwado, and then there's a point at which it flows back towards Frankton Arm. So we obviously want to be able to make sure of that, because if it's flowing back into Frankton Arm there, there's a risk of algal growth and that type of thing there. So there's a lot of different stuff that we feel we need to know there. We didn't feel that we could do that within the time frame available, but more importantly, the cost of actually doing that to get that we didn't feel was the best investment at the time. We had an opportunity to undertake some desktop work around that for GHD to undertake that, which would give us, we felt, a very good analysis of what each of those options would be, and in terms of what we could achieve there, and a likely cost of each of those that we could take forward to our options assessment in October that we completed. So we decided at that point to undertake a more of a desktop focus there rather than the actual site investigations to inform that. So with everything we come up with subsequently around the Frankton Flats options, there is some risk to those because they're not validated by site investigations at this point. What they did come up with though in terms of the Frankton Flats aquifer capacity assessment, and this is some quite sophisticated modelling, but we believe that there is a maximum capacity of 20,000 cubic metres a day on the Frankton Flats aquifer before or without causing any adverse effects on there. So all that analysis is essentially shown, I think it's the 95th percentile, so there's only a 5% chance that you'll be able to achieve that 20,000 cubic metres a day. And I've just put a note in there beside it, our 2060 average daily flow is that 26,000 cubic metres a day. That analysis was undertaken for both the bore and the soak hole options. And at today's flow of around that 12,500 cubic metres a day, the analysis has shown we believe there's a 25% chance of achieving that on Frankton Flats in the bores, and only a 13% chance of achieving that level of volume with the soak holes. So that really pivoted, I guess, or it caused us to sort of reassess where we were at in terms of those land disposal options. We did then go back and re-review some of the long list in terms of the land options there. One of the key drivers here was to try and identify a land-based disposal option. We went back to the long list and said, right, with what we know now, is there any of those that we feel should be perhaps elevated and come back into the mix with what we know? But essentially, none of those were considered any more viable at that point than what we were working with. So.
Yeah, just a question. I mean, I'm interested in that we've so quickly written off the QAC land option because I'm aware that, firstly, it hasn't been to their board members at all. That feedback was given during a time when they had an interim CE. We didn't even have a full CE. So we've very quickly written off. They haven't even sought to understand what the implications are on that, what the options are, what the implications are, what the diagonal drilling, whatever it is, I think I think we need to have a broader discussion there, and equally keeping in mind that they are our company and we can instruct them to do something if there's an option there that doesn't have an operational conflict. So I just wanted to signal that discussion should be seen as over. And we actually need to go and probably have a governance level discussion with them around what the options are there. So I'm really, to signal that I'm really surprised that got shut down so quickly in that context.
It's probably important as well to reflect on the aquifer limitations at this point as well. Like, when you look at the options in front of you, it tells you there's we end up with these. I don't want to. Sorry, I'm going to get to the punchline too early. So we'll let Andy keep talking and pick this up.
I was going to say I do agree with you on that aspect with dealing with the airport, but then the follow-up is, like you say, the aquifer capacity, because that almost makes part of Frankton Flats. Have the capacity. And this was sort of, we were working through this all in parallel. You're exactly right. I think what the bottom point there really shows is that even if we went to Frankton Flats, we're not confident of being able to get the full volume out to 2060 up there. In fact, the volume of what we're currently disposing of, the 25 and 13% chance of being able to achieve that volume.
If you
split it.
Looking to move the whole lot, but could, as I suggested.
That's why I cut myself off.
I'll do the same. Sorry.
So I guess where the shortlist options from 9-10 months ago have moved from, that's them on the left-hand column. The changes in the centre there, and then what they've essentially evolved to for our latest shortlist assessment, and what you will see in the shortlist report is how they've moved. Essentially, the land flow to the Kawerau and then the subsurface wetland, no real change to those. They've continued to be pushed into that shortlist option. Each of those options up on Frankton Flats, or the first two, the injection wells and the soak holes, We don't think either of them can take the full volume up there by themselves. So what we've essentially made is a hybrid of those with option B as it was related up there. And I'll talk through those in a schematic shortly to sort of embed that a bit better. We chose option B because, as I say, the intent of those options on Franklin was to try and get a land disposal option. Option B, going through the subsurface wetland, is the closest remaining that has essentially an element of land contact in there. From a cultural perspective, it's absolutely not a land contact, but I guess it remains to be seen from a consenting perspective as to whether it achieves land contact as well. But that was the intent there.
Did we talk to the airport about that? The subsurface wetland and the impacts?
We have raised that with them. They were very keen to see some further analysis, but in terms of what it would look like in the design. But I'll talk a bit, if you mind, I'll cover it a little bit.
Okay.
The last option there, 2A, that's that moderate rate land disposal. So that's the one I referred to, required a large area of ground, I think 70 to 90 hectares type thing. And with the feedback that came back from QAC plus the analysis around the aquifer capacity, we didn't think that was viable as a standalone option or even as a hybrid. But what we have included that as a supplementary option, which we could, for sports fields and the QAC or QEC, Queenstown Event Centre area up there, that we could add some sports field irrigation and that type of thing up there to do that. I guess the premise being that if you're going to make the investment to get treated wastewater up onto Franklin Flats, you'd try and dispose of as much of it as you could up there and use every opportunity. So that's carried forward as a supplementary option. So really just talking through what each of those options looks like in a little bit more detail. Option A is really, there's a part of that in really each of everything. So up at the top, try and get the mouse to work, up where the cursor key is there now. So that's where the current UV treatment plant is. There'd be additional filtration added there that would take care of a lot of this suspended solids and anything that might be remaining in that treated wastewater. So that would occur before the UV treatment, which would then make the UV treatment better because it doesn't have that the suspended solids in the water there. That would then follow essentially a conveyance, a land flow path, following the blue line down around the training line and into the bottom right corner of the image up there. Now that conveyance could either be in sort of a rock channel or an open channel or a pipe in the ground. We've priced it in terms of this work as a pipe in the ground, keep it well away from anyone and keep it separate. The outlet, or where it's actually discharged into the Kawerau River, we're looking to push, the proposals to push that as close to the confluence with the Shotover River as possible. A couple of points there is that aids with the mixing of it as well. And also it opens up that sort of recreational area from there back towards the airport that's commonly used from people down there fishing, launching boats and all that. Currently there's nutrients coming out along there from the existing or the previous disposal field, and so the intention of this is to try and move that all the way to basically free up that recreational zone as much as possible. The grey area on the far side there is a rock outfall. The idea being there that the water would come, the treated wastewater would come out of the pipe, and then it would flow through a rock outfall feature, which is essentially carved out in the ground and larger rocks to put in there so that it avoids people being able to come into contact with the treated wastewater, but it allows essentially a small amount of land contact before it gets to reaches the Kawerau River there. From there, we'd be reliant on the mixing of the river and the confluence there with the Shotover for any mixing as well. There is an alternate option that's been suggested, and we need a little bit more time to work around this in terms of how that final mixing might work. Rather than the rock outfall as I've just described, there may be a diffuser. Essentially, the pipe is extended into the river and diffused out of it, and you get that instantaneous mixing there and away from the edge of the river where people could be fishing or walking the dog type thing. So that's something that we're looking to just work through a little bit more detail over the next couple of months.
Is the rock outfall the expensive part of that? Because I just don't understand how we're discharging in a pipe and it's going to be 38 million.
Yeah, the pipe was actually quite a considerable cost of that as well, yeah. But you've also got the filtration and that type of thing added up there, but yeah.
Filtration's included?
Sorry?
Filtration is included.
Yeah.
Why are we better to that? So that location for the existing is based on is it pond one, the old pond one observation pond, is it, or pond 3?
Sorry, why the UV is where it
is?
Well,
why are we better to that location? Because that seems to be irrelevance now, because the treatment's all up there and the discharges are down there. So why is that's just in no man's land, and it's going to inhabit the rehabilitation of the oxidation ponds and things like that. I mean, that just seems. And if we're spending all this money, I mean, it's a box this big, and it's not substantial infrastructure. Why are we better to that location?
Well, I guess there's the opportunity for that treated water emergency diversion pond to utilise at the back end of pond 3. You could relocate that to one of the other ponds. But I guess at the moment, from our sense, it's utilising the infrastructure we have and avoiding the spend to relocate for no particular benefit.
So I think following on from that point, rather than dig a long blue pipe, what's the advantage of that rather than going just from where the yellow arrow is straight out into the river?
Into the shot over.
Yeah.
So there's quite a significant difference between discharging to the shot over as a braided dynamic river with a lower flow rate compared to discharging to the Kararo where it's much higher. The main channel is very defined and a much higher dilution. So it is imperative to discharge to the Kararo over the shot over.
Yeah, I get that. The dynamics of that environment, have you looked at the diffuser proposed or considered the likelihood of it being inundated by gravels and being included?
Yeah, so we need to do some more work around the diffuser. They certainly have challenges. Cromwell discharges through a diffuser at the moment, and they really do suffer from aggradation.
So does Christchurch out there, see? So what's the time frame for design and completion of this option?
So this option we believe will be done by December 2030. So within the time frame required for that. Option B is the introduction of a subsurface wetland. So look, it is essentially what I've described as option A, but we're introducing that subsurface wetland, which is the large sort of green area shown in the right there. What does that look like? There's some images on the right-hand side to try and show that. We did have some more slides, but we're trying to sort of cut them down. But essentially, you won't see any water on the top, or that's how it's designed. So there's essentially it's a lined wetland, so it's not designed for the water to soak through it into the ground. So it's designed for the treated wastewater to pass through on a horizontal basis. It's filled with gravel material that allows a certain volume to go through, and it's got plants in it that can draw from the nutrients from the water that passes through. We've talked specifically around that it needs to be designed in a way that doesn't attract birds for the airport risks and that, or insects and that type of thing that are going to then attract birds. So specifically, it's been discussed, and we're only at concept design at this stage, but it's around avoiding surface water and avoiding attracting any birds into that area.
Yeah, so careful selection of the plant species becomes.
So that's providing how much treatment and.
So I guess the nutrient levels in the discharge will mean there's not a lot of nutrients for the plants to take up. So you wouldn't be expecting any significant difference. It is more for providing some kind of land contact.
But the water's still going to go out the other end, and it's still going to go anyway. So what's the advantage of it?
So there will be an element of polishing. It provides for some land contact.
Some land context, but not just, what does that mean?
What's that?
Well, I mean, you've said,
What-
yeah, sorry,
cultural
yeah,
Yeah.
from
So, well,
yeah,
so, yeah, look,
is that a perceptive
yeah,
thing?
you've hit the nail on the head there. To me, this is a perception part of it in terms of trying to get some element of land contact in an area that's very difficult to do that. From a cultural perspective, this isn't considered land contact. So they don't support this or any options on the delta because they consider them to be too close to the receiving environment, that it's effectively a discharge to water as well. So this was as an option that would hopefully provide some form of visual element that gave the perception that there was an element of land contact there, but it is quite limited in what it can do because essentially what we're putting in is fairly highly treated, so that means that what comes out the other end isn't that different. If we put in less treated wastewater at the top end, we'd get a much different variance coming out through the other end as well.
So I'm just going to follow up on that with the caption on the bottom picture says ultra low total nitrogen removal. So what is ultra low?
That was one of our comments, captions, unfortunately, so I don't know in that context what ultra low would be, but
I mean, it's quite relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah, I don't have the details of that.
Okay, so
and I guess by industry standards, we are in the ultra low regime.
but maybe not ultra low enough, depending on what the algae does.
That's right.
Yeah,
So
okay, so that's
this is the sort of thing that's required, that having gone through the process for a relatively large domestic application of a process like this. And yes, what comes out of the treatment plant is relatively high quality, but there's still desirably a natural environment for that to go into to just essentially finish it off. How vulnerable though is this to those variabilities in load? So with it double the amount and when there's stormwater coming in here, and there'd be a minimum load too that you'd need to take into account. Have you checked that out?
Yeah, look, I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head, sorry. But certainly in terms of the developing the solutions, that's, if this is taken forward, that's definitely something we'll be looking at. What I do know is that the subsurface wetland is designed to be added to over time, so you wouldn't necessarily have to make the full investment up front. You could add to it as your volumes do increase.
In terms of the wetland or whatever, or option B, there's no polishing, there's no filtration afterwards. Was that considered?
After
Second,
the
yes, a
subsurface wetland?
Another level of filtration before it goes into the river.
We haven't considered
that. And that would be quite challenging from a hydraulic perspective because you'd end up having to pump again to get through a filter system.
I can see why it's option B.
Yeah. But if you look at, I mean, and someone said this the other day, that E. coli and all that sort of stuff is you could actually be producing more E. coli at the end of the wetland than what you're putting into it because you've already basically killed everything, put it through the UV, and then you're slowing it down in an organic environment, which could actually breed more. So it's a...
that is a known risk with wetlands.
Right.
So
what happened with the dam?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's, it only takes one E. coli to breed into, more. Sorry, in the right environment. So we're just going to be super careful. But I mean, I just wanted to comment too that some of these, with respect, sound like, when I said perceptive, we're doing these to be seen to be doing the right thing. And you talked about land contact down on the rock discharge, you talked about that in the wetland. And I think, we need to be focusing on what is the best outcome, what not is seen to be the best outcome. And I think we've just got to be careful there, not to be greenwashing this. So.
And that's certainly not the intent. I guess what
the
team is trying to do is to look at the opportunities that are present within a very constrained environment.
My point is the benefits have got to be real, not perceived.
Yeah, and it is a difficult one. The potential benefits are relatively minimal, and there are additional risks associated with this, and there are additional costs, and all of those are factored into the scoring ultimately.
Sure. So just speaking to that, if we go back to the GHD report, which clearly, sets out the aspiration of Rebecca, that there is a more holistic investigation. These are the words, that there should be a more holistic investigation of wastewater needs and alternatives to clean sound that should be required, that's not constrained by continuing to rely on treatment at this location. So what are we doing to respond to that very, very clear position?
So there is a longer term piece of work for our strategy team looking at our strategy for wastewater servicing. We have explored in great detail the opportunities for land discharge across the basin, and they are incredibly limited. And having a whole series of distributed treatment plants doesn't change the land take available and the challenges with the availability of that land and the suitability of that land. Like a huge swathe of the basin is within the Lake Hayes catchment, and that's basically unable to be used because it's already got a zero threshold for nutrients.
So beyond 2060 then, how much wastewater are we considering might be pumped into that river beyond?
So I'm not sure.
If we go down this route now, we sort of potentially lock ourselves in while we're doing a piece of long-term strategic work.
So maybe I can try and answer that. The two MLE plants that are now online are designed to get to 48. It's not 2048, it will be less than that. We need to be able to dispose of the treated effluent. This is what this disposal process is about. There are very few options for that. We are doing more work around the longer term wastewater needs across the district. But we're still going to need plants that deal with our current load. Now, whether we extend the treatment at this particular site and continue to centralise is a question we're working through. We've got some time to work that through. This process is about making sure we're able to dispose of the current flow that we know is going to hit that plant. There's another bit of work looking at the broader question. We've also got a number of developers proposing to do their own treatment based on their own needs in various locations around the district. We're working that through. So whether we continue to bring all of that into the central location or whether we do more dispersed treatments, we're still working through. But to be clear, we need to get this sorted so we've got capacity at this site out to 2048. Sooner than then, that's what this process is about. Yes, we're going to come back around the bigger question, both for this side of the hill and for the other side as well, up and through in terms of...
I mean, the intensification of pregnant plants, Ladies Mile and Old Queenstown is enough to justify this long term anyway, isn't it? Even if everything the other side went somewhere else.
And the likelihood, without second guessing, but the likelihood of not having a treatment plant there in the longer term, given its capacity and the cost, is very, very limited. Whether we continue to centralise that is a question for the future. We don't have that now. But we've got to have this sorted in terms of our current treatment, our current capacity. And as Simon has said, the investigations that have been done show and demonstrate very limited capacity to discharge to land in a way that does not enter water.
That's the reality, isn't it? I think the community needs to, through these conversations and the work you're doing, I'm impressed. They need to be assured that we are looking at this strategically, but also taking, because cultural values are not just Te Ao Māori values, they are values of people otherwise who live here. So we need, and that perception is more than just perception.
Yeah.
It is the values that we put in this place that we live in. So therefore, I can't help but think about the metropolis of Kingston and what is going to be there, not just what's currently developing. So this is going to be an ongoing problem. We need to make sure that these things are considered. Have you thought about where this will be in 18 months' time when there's a CCO in place and there will need to be a council considering the development aspects of it, and then there's a CCO dealing with the water infrastructure aspects? Or have you thought about how that's going to play itself out through this, Tony?
Yeah, so we're working on those wastewater strategies, water strategies, trying to paint that picture, trying to get a much better view of that. That will be handed across to the CCO with a very clear indication of growth corridors, where we're at in terms of that consideration. The significant constraint across the district at the moment has been for some time is wastewater capacity. We can generally do water, roads,
soak up congestion, and we don't like it. Wastewater is the major constraint. So any CCO will need to be well aligned with the CCO, the growth agenda and how we deal with that. Got a little work underway at the moment around that, what that future might look like. But the fast track consenting process itself demonstrates that even our best plans around trying to do spatial plans, you get a fast track consent application which completely ignores that, and something comes in. So how do we deal with that?
Quite the risk, those drivers are almost out of our control to some extent for the fast track.
Well, the fast track we're obviously inputting into that. One of the key issues around infrastructure is what are they planning? You know, some of them are looking at doing their own treatment. For quite large residential areas, obviously we might have a view about whether land-based disposal, which they're all looking at, is actually viable in those areas. Looking at the risk of consents being granted and then the council in the future taking over those plants for all the risks around there. We do tend to have, again, those fast-track applications almost by definition are outside our zoned areas, outside of our infrastructure serviceable areas. We need to think about that in terms of the future. Do we look at more dispersed wastewater systems rather than centralisation? Those are things that we've got to work through and we are working on. But for this, we've got existing treatment. We've got to dispose of the treated effluent. That's what this process is about. And it's an open question as to whether we continue to expand here. But if we can't get, for example, a consent for the full volume, and so therefore the limit shot over to here and now, then that also is a big signal for us. So,
I mean, I know we've done this with water, but have we looked at demand management more with wastewater in terms of, you know, low flush toilets, you know, shower heads and all this sort of actually standardising these? Because while all these things, look, we're not going to solve the problem, but we could buy ourselves 20 or 30% capacity in our discharge systems by doing demand management. By regulating low flush toilets and things.
Because it's the load in the pollutant, not the volume of water that becomes the.
Well, that was my next question: is does that actually solve the problem for you anyway?
Yeah. So there's two things. So you have to design for hydraulic capacity, but you also have to design for actual loading on the trap plant.
Sorry, I'd love to keep cracking on. Look, we've talked about option A and B, right? So next one is just to try and articulate what option C and D look like. I talked before about how each of them essentially becomes a hybrid. So if you can think of option C and D, you are consenting option B, and we've chosen option B because of that, the subsurface wetland and that land contact component. It could easily be option A, but let's just assume option B here. You are consenting and constructing option B at the same time that you are doing investigations and developing up onto Frankton Flats. We need to do those investigations, proof of concept, before we really fully invest into them. So if you could imagine both of option C and D look like this, with option B being constructed up front, and then the infrastructure being taken up to Frankton Flats, including additional membrane filtration, pumps and storage tanks up on there. And even that is undertaken as a staged process, which I'll go through shortly. But that's kind of how option C and D, when we're looking at it and when we've assessed it, it's a hybrid of B and either C or D.
Can I just a quick question? The filtration and stuff that you've got in this picture, is that assumed for option A as well?
Yes.
The filtration is, the membrane filtration, which is additional, is for option C and D only.
Why could we not put that into option A? What's the, down the track?
So option C is the deep bores. So once, imagine the previous slide, it gets it up onto Frankton Flats. We believe we can utilise the council-owned land corridors and that type of thing around there, looking at a total of 10 bores, we believe, to achieve, and that each of those is down at a depth of roughly 100 metres. Some key elements up there, but essentially, eventually, if you were to make this work, you'd need 3 large storage tanks up there. So once the treated wastewater has gone through that additional membrane filtration, it's then stored up there and then dosed down each of these bores. The reason for 10 bores is that some of them can be offline to allow those to rest as well. Option D, very similar, except it's using the soak holes. The difference there is the soak hole only goes down about that 20 metres, and as I said before, it then lets the wastewater drain away and percolate. Because of that, the capacity of each of those soak holes is less than the bore, so we need more of them. The analysis and the costing we've done is based on 50 of those soak holes. You could do more to get a greater quantity there, but you've still got that sort of head of the aquifer capacity that we need to consider there. Similar type arrangement there, though. We think all of that can go into the roading corridors without the need for land, except maybe the space for those storage tanks, and maybe the only element that's required where land is required. I talked about each of those options C and D and how they'd be staged. If we got the green light to move on option C or D, as I said, we would be progressing with option B in parallel, get that consent and constructed, and in parallel with that, we'd undertake an initial trial stage, and that's going to be 1 to 2 years, as it says up there, confirming the assumptions that we understand about the aquifer capacity, undertaking some testing up there, actually building some soak holes, but just using fresh water to understand how that dissipates away. And I did have a typo in the original plan, which I've highlighted up there. If that's successful, then move to that stage 1, which would be starting to build some of that infrastructure I showed you in that earlier slide to get it from the delta up onto Frankton Flats. Looking at perhaps 2 bores, 2 to maybe 5 soak holes, and then essentially doing a proof of concept up there before, and again, if that proves successful, then moving to that future stage of the full componentry up there. So that's kind of how we see that flowing if option C or D were progressed.
You'd still have to invest in the pump station, right?
Yeah, and I think between those 2 stages, there's a smaller one, or I think it's a second one in parallel is added for the later stage type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that investment at trial stage 1 is significant.
Yeah, it is. An overarching sort of assessment of the environmental impacts for all options, and noting that all options actually at the shortlist now include some form of discharge to the kaore. So really some of the key highlights there is that we believe that once the mixing occurs, there's not going to be too much variance from either of them in terms of an environmental side of things. I talked before about the improvement of there's very little improvement in nutrient concentrations achieved from the failed DADs, so particularly in some of the nitrogen and ammonia, I think it is, that we put in at the top end of the DAD, we're seeing the same stuff coming out along the Kawerau River. So it suggests that even, that land disposal as we've sort of currently known it has very limited benefits in terms of some of those nutrients and how they work. Certainly for the polishing of any remaining suspended solids, and the other key thing is putting it through the disposal field would reduces the viruses, the virus load in the treated wastewater. Viruses are one of the things that it's pretty limited treatment in dealing with those, so that's one of the main risks, and why there is the need to ensure that there's an adequate mixing with the treated wastewater once it is disposed into the receiving environment. Near field effects are stuff that's close to it. Really, how the impact of that is really going to be dependent on how we sort of get the treated wastewater into the receiving environment between the outfall or the diffuser options, or through the earth or through the land. And as I think we've alluded to before, there are some improvements in treatment that we can use to sort of balance some of those the increases in discharge volumes over time. We've talked before about the cultural side of things, and Mayor Glover, you referred to elements of the iwi position statement. I just wanted to cover this off really briefly. So we've had a really strong working relationship with the iwi representatives from both Te Marama and our kaha right back from sort of late last year. They've worked with us to understand the options and provide some really clear feedback from their perspective. Look, iwi are very clear, as I said before, that they don't support a discharge to water, and that they consider anything on the delta as being that discharge to water. When it became evident that none of the options in the shortlist would be able to achieve, or all of them had some form of discharge to water, the iwi representatives confirmed their position and they withdrew themselves from that final, the option scoring which we undertook in October. We'll get onto that shortly, but they refrained from being involved in that. They provided feedback on each of the options. And key to that is they provided a position statement which is shared across all the Runaka. There's a copy of that within the shortlist report, and this slide has the 4 or 5 bullet points of some of the key points from that position statement. I'm going to give you 1 minute to just have a read over that and just make sure everyone sort of understands that before I move to the next slide.
So while you're reading that, we've actually met recently with Akaha and Tammy around iwi wanting to have I've described as a mana after mana context. We're trying to work through with them how that might look. They're very keen to present their views. So we're working with both those entities and around how we enable that before you come to a decision point. So that's a work in progress. Reflect that.
Nice.
Given all of the stuff that has to happen and the level of investigation of some of these things, are we considering now applying for an extension to that deadline to apply for consent? It's not that far away.
Yeah,
so something will be a discussion point when we get to the next step stage.
I am sort of conscious we are getting tight for time, so we take that as read.
Yeah, if there's any questions on that, I think we do have representatives from both Akaha and Te Marama online if there are any questions specific to that.
I probably do. I mean, do they have they investigated any potential options in terms of land-based treatment?
Well, I think they've been involved in the work to date. You're asking me
so maybe the question is there anything any options in the long list that they would specifically like further investigation of? And are there any other pieces of land that they would like investigation of?
Nuria or Sandra, I'm not sure if either of you are online. Did you hear that question?
We did. Is Sandra, are you online, Sandra?
Yes, I'm online. I guess that's a question that would be better addressed when you do have mana whenua being able to talk to you. They can talk more about some of our Runaka representatives have been involved in previous considerations of alternatives, and they've got much more of the history than we do at Te Marama and Okaha in terms of the sorts of options the broader options that have been discussed. I guess the key point in the position statement is that they think there needs to be a broader consideration altogether, which I think is something which you've been talking about today as well. But yeah, I think if I can let our Runaka know that you would like to discuss that with them when they present to you, and we can make sure that they're prepared to answer that question at that point.
Thank you. That would be great.
Okay. Take that as we've got about 15 minutes.
Yeah, pick up the pace.
Preliminary capital costs for each of those options. It essentially goes from left to right on the screen, A, B, C, D. The bolded line is the spread of where we think the capital costs up front are going to be. C and D, just note, they include also option B. That's why they're quite a large cost, because they essentially include two different disposal options.
So you're doing the wetland regardless?
No, that's just how it's been priced up. So you could add A to it and take off that effective $30 million.
The treatment component of option A, how much of the cost is treatment? And what treatment are you suggesting in that on that slide?
So that is just additional tertiary filtration, which is not the membrane filtration. The membrane filtration is only in the land disposal. And so that's to make sure you get all the really small fines out, because there's such an investment in the soak holes and the bore holes that cumulative fouling will be incredibly risky and costly up on the, there, whereas it's got limited benefit from a true perspective on the delta.
Because I'm thinking microplastics and all of those things that come out, and then presumably if you're filtering out all of the solids, everything that attaches to them in the process, you've got the greatest chance of removing as many emerging contaminants as you could. So I'm just wondering, what is the cost of membrane filtration if we were to add that to option A?
It was 30 odd million,
35, I think.
Yeah.
So membrane is...
Can I just, so really to quickly run through, come back to you, I've really run out of time.
So yeah, operating cost is shown up there. Essentially the whole of life cost under an MPV in the yellow highlight below really indicates the key numbers for each of those options. I'm going to forego the questions, on this section and move straight to the next couple of slides. So in terms of the actual analysis and the option selection, couple of slides to sort of try and articulate that. So for each of those options with the whole of life cost that we talked about, this slide shows the impact on rates, and that rates impact is against the sewage levy only, so not the overall rates, just the sewage levy. So it's additional for option A, an additional $98 onto that sewage levy. The sewage levy for Queenstown at the moment is around $823, so an additional 12% on that. And likewise with the development contribution, that is just against the wastewater contribution, and that's around 12,500 currently for Queenstown and Franklin Flats. So for option A, you'd be adding another 2,000 approximately onto that development contribution.
Do those figures change if we look forward to the development levy scenario?
What was that, sorry?
Under the development levy.
The mechanism's probably different, but the quantum will still be similar. And those are based on the assessed cost for the growth component. So whether it's levies or, I'm assuming would be similar figures, but I don't know.
The actual scoring of this by the project team in the workshop in early October, this is the results of that and how each option scored. Each option was scored against the base case, which is what we are currently doing, the discharge to the Shotover River, and it was essentially a -5 or +5 in terms of whether it was a disbenefit or made it worse or made it better. iwi, as I said, there's 3 sections there that we, in the long list, we got iwi scoring on. We didn't, in some of those options, iwi considered them at the long list fatally flawed, particularly the options on the delta. We carried them forward subsequently, and we didn't have a fatally flawed scoring on the short list of options. We felt we needed a numerical score to allow for weighting, but iwi perspective was they didn't feel that fairly represented their position, so we removed their score. So those scores up there in the grey show where the iwi scoring have provided no score. As I said, they've provided the position statement instead.
So presumably the direct discharge to the river they see as flawed.
Yes, correct. And I think someone asked, around the achievability, constructability, and all those sorts of elements. So a lot of those criteria are seen in the bottom half of that. And as you can see, the simpler it is, the better it's scored. When we start going up onto Franklin Flats, it's more complex. There's more risk. We're utilising newer technology that's not widely used in New Zealand. So there's just that whole element of risk that's been built into the scoring that's been provided here. So look, what all of that analysis has deducted is that from a technical position and a technically preferred option is option A. The key elements up there, I'll just sort of talk about that lower risk. It's the simpler design and operation. There's greater certainty of actually being able to accommodate all of those future flows. We talked about we might consent those future flows out to 2060 and we might build to be able to do that. In my perspective, it doesn't actually mean that we have to put that full volume down there if there is a more decentralised way chosen forward, but at least gives us that flexibility if we all do that. Capital cost, and you've seen the impact on the likely rates and development contributions impact. And one thing I don't think it does preclude is the ability to make further treatment upgrades in the future. And my perspective on that is we've looked, and I feel we've done a really good analysis of trying to find a suitable land option. Our unique environment here in Queenstown in the Wakatipu Basin makes that very difficult. I certainly appreciate the landscape and the environment that we do live in here and how beautiful it is. And the discharge to the water under option A, from my perspective is it's difficult to find that land, and what this analysis has shown is that there are very little alternatives to actually looking at that full discharge to the Kawerau. And if we're going to do that, then maybe we make our investment into the treatment train further up to make sure what is actually going into the Kawerau is the highest quality that we can make it as a summary of that.
We're landing on it, and I understand all of that. We're landing on a technically preferred option, but we still don't understand the impact of the new rules and whether we can, given the categorisation of the Kawerau, whether our MLE plants are going to deliver the right level of nitrogen. So are we premature in heading down this path before we understand that?
I guess we're not making a recommendation at this point in time. We're presenting the results of the analysis. We do need...
So this could read subject to an analysis of the impact, because presumably the land standards are slightly different?
They are, but I guess...
So what's the nitrogen standard?
All these options at the moment, but it's a difficult answer, and I can't answer it for anyone. It's far more complex for us to figure out how our land options here relate to the land options in the consent, because they are all based on kind of horizontal discharges, where we have got a vertical discharge, so they're based on contaminant loadings per hectare, where that doesn't really apply to our circumstance. So the standards aren't a perfect fit for the land options we're exploring.
I guess we probably need to figure that out though, and we need to understand whether this is feasible under the rules and whether the land options actually do present in some ways a lesser risk. They may or may not, but we need that information in front of us. This is not enough, I don't think. And that's
obviously we only received the legislation a week
I know,
ago,
and that's why my suggestion that we might need to think ahead.
I think we're getting to the next step.
Okay, sorry.
Quick question. What's the arithmetic around the development contributions and indicative rates impact that you've got 2 slides previous? In other words, how do you come up with $400 for option D? And, I'm trying to divide that into the number of projected people. It's projected 2061, that will be 200,000 people.
Okay, we might need
So,
rather than answer that, I think we should...
just broadly, tell me broadly, how did you come up with those numbers?
The finance team have got a template that we put in, the likely capital and operating costs over the 30-year life of the project, and it comes out with...
This assumes a static population or a growing population?
Growing population.
Right, thank you.
It does, just without going too deep, it does raise the question as how much of this can we put on growth-related costs. Now, obviously there is no compliant solution at the moment. This is a level of service question to bring everybody up to speed, but that may not have occurred had we not had the pressures of growth and all that sort of stuff. So, I think there is an argument.
There is still a significant growth.
It's roughly 50-50 in terms of growth and level of service.
No, it needs to be more than that. We need to stop going, we have to wait a bit. Most of it goes on growth.
It needs to be defensible, but it's probably not the right...
No,
if we can take that away.
I think Catherine should pick it up. I'm sorry, really conscious of time. We've got 7 minutes to try and...
So just if we are looking about going forward, and there's a slide that we haven't got to yet that talks about community engagement starting on the 25th of January. Bear in mind the intangibles that we've talked about. How do we do community engagement when we don't know what we are allowed and will be allowed to put into the river? Because we can't. It might be. That's my view. I'm sure.
So our suggestion. I think if we can work through the slides just very quickly, it'll be the easiest way, and then we can get into the discussion.
So consenting strategy-wise, we're working on an overarching consenting strategy, and we'll come back to you in the new year with what exactly that does for each of the options, and also when presenting a recommended for the recommended option. Planning considerations, there's some really good information in the shortlist report. I'm not going to go into these in any detail right now, sorry. Iwi and community engagement, as I say, we're continuing to work with our kaha and Te Ao Marama throughout this. They don't support any of these options. We fully understand that, but are very keen to continue that working relationship to try and find some sort of level ground. In terms of the community engagement, we are looking. We've actually got the basis of some community engagement drop-in sessions planned for next week that we would like to undertake, and that's to provide an opportunity to inform the community about the work that's been undertaken to date. The plan is to have elements there including the MLE work, essentially what I've covered in this presentation today, to help inform the community about some of the challenges and where the analysis is drawn in terms of the pros and cons of each of the shortlist options.
Will we be suggesting that we have a technically preferred option?
We will be showing them what our plan is to show them what the analysis has come up with at this point, yes.
So it's the same information that's been shared today. That's the intent, is trying to provide an opportunity for the community to be aware of the process and what that has told us to date.
I would have some level of discomfort
if we don't know.
If there's some significant game-changing stuff that we don't know. That's
sounds like
and frankly, that amounts to selling a certain option, or the way this is constructed, it's selling an option. And so when you engage with the community, you are in effect asking for an option, and you're guiding the conversation.
Well, it's not our intent to be selling an option to you today. It is to share the output of a genuine process to look at the options available to the community to inform your decision making.
We just need, I guess, feedback needs to be informed, and at the moment we still don't have significant information about the feasibility of these options in terms of standards. And so I just think we need to be really careful that we don't go out too early and need to come back to elected members and make sure that you're covering the spectrum of information that needs to be covered.
So I guess it's really important that we're all very aware that based on the current enforcement order, we would require a decision from this council in February. If we're going to, obviously there's been legislation changes, we've been working through this process, and it's been complex as we all expected it to be. If we are going to need to create more time to understand the legislation, that's going to trigger the requirement to apply to the court.
Yep.
And it will be at the court's discretion whether they will grant an extension.
I think we all understand we're talking about at some point having to decide on what is the least worst option, because I don't think anyone can agree there is any good options that everyone can get behind. So that's the difficulty, and I think in that context we owe it to ourselves to understand everything that we need to know to land on what is the least worst option. And that's quite important.
And part of that is allowing time for
I was going to say, in some ways, this is exactly what the community wants. They want to see what the analysis is showing at this stage before a decision or a recommendation is being made, rather than where we get criticised for going to community consultation with a proposed option and another option.
As long as we don't say technically preferred about.
I like the sound of that, Kevin. So going out and saying, look, this is what we're looking at. These are the options. These are currently what we know about the anticipated costs, and some of them are quite significant. But we haven't made a decision on that yet. We want to get some feedback on that from you, and then that will help us make a decision in February.
But also potentially say we know this, but we don't know this. If we
Be
don't
open
know. So
about-
say what you don't know yet would be great. Yeah.
Because, just with, although it's not as big an issue, but the communication around the Frankton Track project too, we just want to get ahead of that and make sure that we're as open as possible so that it's people feel like they've been listened to.
Quick comment, you guys are public, correct? Perhaps not now, but you could ask them what they think.
Can I just say that next week I can't see a whole lot of people happening to be spared for a workshop on sewage. Sorry.
No, we understand it's the worst time of the year.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, proposed at the moment is 11th and 15th community drop-in session to present this in the sense we've done. So this is the background, this is information, this is the technically preferred option, these are the uncertainties to try and get because the other thing that we also have to deal with is the media and comms sort of storm about this if we don't tell our story well.
Exactly. That's what
and about the things that have actually been considered and putting that in the arena. It's not as though it's just come up all of a sudden and popped in and said this is an option that we want to pursue. So trying to get that information out, particularly after this workshop and reporting on this, so we it's about trying to manage that as best we can.
Sure. If there is someone out there in our community or beyond who has a wonderful solution that mitigates more of this and perhaps even solves some of the problems, I think we should listen to that too. It's not just going through the process, because there are options elsewhere that other communities have done. Some of them have to spend a whole lot more money to achieve something marginally better, but we have to have that conversation.
Well, I think that sharing this information is really important, and looking at those 4 options we've got and the cost difference across them, to your point that you raised earlier, Councillor Fanning, there's opportunities to invest in enhanced treatment over what you're required to do to get a consent potentially to make it more acceptable for the community, for our stakeholders.
Include those modules and those costs with the
and
consultation.
we've done extensive work in understanding those treatment enhancements and what they could be and what they would deliver.
Presenting those would be great. And just lastly, I think if we want to have a man-to-man conversation, I think we need to allow in the process the time for that to happen in a genuine way. So it's not just a token gesture, we need to consider that out the back of that, something might change.
Any last questions?
What's our current position on capacity in the network for connections? Because obviously we don't have any consented capacity as of today. We have 0 consented capacity.
Yeah.
And, you know, in hardware, we've taken the view that we don't have capacity, therefore we're not taking additional connections. I mean, what's our position? I got sort of laughed at last year when I made that suggestion that we need to have a discussion about whether we continue to double down and make this problem worse rather than when we have no capacity, we have no consented capacity. Capacity that isn't consented is not capacity.
I guess one of the fundamental differences between, I guess, the Harvey situation and Shotover is that whilst, yes, we're not performing in compliance with the consent, we are actually still treating to the state required and returning into the same receiving environment. We're not doing it in the way that's prescribed in the consent. So it is different from an environmental effects perspective, whereas in hardware, we've exceeded the nutrient limitations there, and those nutrient limitations were what the assessment of environmental effects was based on. So that is a higher risk situation, but they're obviously both still not compliant with the consent.
Was that the view of the ORC? Were we guided in terms of our responses by the ORC?
They haven't provided advice to that effect.
I think that's a live question though.
Well, I mean, we don't have capacity, we don't have it and won't have it for some time, any legal capacity. And regardless of I mean, you know, we have to be real about that. The bucket is full. We don't have a new bucket. You know, we've gone through that housing and development capacity assessment. We know that that deficit's going to increase over time, and particularly in some locations. I just think we need to be real about what our infrastructure constraints are. We just can't overfill buckets, and we're continuing to do that across all fronts.
I think developers see that too, and that's where the, land disposal within their own subdivisions is occurring, and we'd have to ask, is that really a bad thing? Depending on how it's done, it could be part of our, decentralisation strategy.
Sure, other than the other things they bring.
Okay, so thanks for the time. We've given you a lot of information. We do have a site tour booked in for the 18th of December, which is the first we could do. We are going to skim past Shotover today on the bus tour. We won't call in because it takes quite a long time to call in. Obviously, we've got we're proposers to have these drop-in sessions. We'll send you notes around that in case you want to come along to that. It'll be very much covering material we've covered off, and it's sort of open for trying to get some of this information out there in public. We're still targeting the dates we've got up there, but we also need to think about whether there's going to be a need for further workshops with councillors in the new year sometime, around before we bring this back.
Yes,
so,
please.
yeah, so maybe John, maybe you can give us some guidance on that after this, if there's enough feedback. But happy to also talk on the bus some more. Simon won't be with us, but we're happy to chat then as well.
Thank you for keeping pretty much to time and accommodating our questions and comments. So well done.
Yeah, no, well done, and thanks, Andy. Andy's put a lot of work into this presentation. So, and thanks everyone online, and thanks for attending.
Oh, I'm just going to say one thing, just the 2 seconds. Kia ora, ko Margie Ferguson tōku ingoa. I'm working for Te Ao Marama, so I'd just like to say to the councillors and all those who've attended, so thank you very much for presentation and for the discussion. And I noted, I'm sorry, I don't know who made the comment, but just on looking at that timeline for involvement and community, etc., there was a reference to looking forward to having that mana-to-mana discussion, so that we definitely are looking forward to that, and there'll be some points that will clear up with you all there. So thank you once again, but we look forward to seeing you in due course.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Kia ora.
Right, thanks, Paul. Thanks, team.